I'm Eric Barnes with the Daily Memphian, and welcome to the Sidebar, a weekly show on the community, arts, culture, and more. Today, we're very pleased to be talking to the musician Greg Cartwright of Raining Sound, the Hypos, and other music projects. So stay with us for a conversation with Greg. And thanks to our sponsor, Youth Villages. Greg, thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks for inviting me, Eric. I really appreciate it.
We are here in Crosstown on the 10th floor atrium with some sort of ruckus in the background, but it's all going to be fine.
It's all part of the action here.
It is all part of the action at Crosstown. There's always a lot of action. People know you from Raining Sound. They know you from all these different projects. If you're like, I do this sometimes with people, especially if people have a lot of projects going on, art, culture, whatever. You're stuck in an elevator for 30 seconds and somebody says, hey, what do you do? How do you introduce yourself?
I usually say I'm a singer-songwriter or I'm a musician.
Yeah.
And then people immediately want to know if you've done something they're aware of.
Yeah.
And I don't really have, I actually do have an answer for that conversation now, which I didn't have for many years. I've started co-writing in the last 2 or 3 years. So I wrote some stuff with the Black Keys, Marcus King, who's playing at the Mempho Fest.
Yeah.
So I've done some, now I can say I can attach my name to something you might be aware of.
Yeah.
Whereas in the past, the answer was pretty much no.
Yeah. But Raining Sound, I assume quite a few people will go, oh, yeah.
Right.
You know,
I mean,
right?
we were never, approaching like Billboard hit status or anything like that, but we definitely had a cult following.
Yeah. Steve Salvage told me, I asked him that story, what do you do in an elevator? And he said, well, I say I'm a musician. And then I always do this thing, and it's not good for podcasting, but where he air guitars for a second.
That's a he's like, good answer.
Just because he's like, he doesn't know how to
pantomime for
he's just trying to describe it and, get it across. Let's also mention you're playing at Goner Fest. When is Goner Fest?
Goner Fest is coming up next week. So that's, we're the first band of the first day.
Okay.
On Thursday. And that's a brand new act. And it's called the Pull Chains, which I named after, there used to be a company here called Pull Chains of Memphis. Okay. But that seemed like a long name, so I just called this Pull Chains. But maybe we'll call the album Of Memphis. But there was some friends from Atlanta, my friend Jesse, who's been in lots of bands, and also my friend Joey, who's from Atlanta but lives in Nashville now and has that bar Duke's, which is a great little venue as well. I've been kind of hatching a plan to have a band with them for a while now, and we decided to throw something together. So we're recording over at Phillips with Scott Bomar, old friend and great engineer, and we're working on that, but this will be like our first big show is Goner Fest.
Yeah.
So we'll see how it goes.
Scott Bomar, a friend of the show. I believe Scott's been on a couple years ago. So
great guy.
Yeah, great guy. Also, the Hypos. Another project?
The Hypos is another project. So we're going out on tour in October with the Hypos. We released a record last year, and we're coming back in November to record an album at Matt Rossbang's Space Downstairs. But that's me, Scott McMicken from Dr. Dog, and our friend Kevin Williams on bass, Evan Martin on drums, and on violin, Krista Roten, who's been in lots of bands around town here in Memphis. She played with Raining Sound for a while as well, too.
Gotcha. Matt was on the show. It was so much fun to talk to him. I think we did 2 shows with Matt, right? We did do 2 shows in the studio, which was really fun. He's so nice.
He's the nicest guy in music.
He's the nicest multi-Grammy award winner. Yeah. Like, he's got to be top 5,
Humble and kind and like everything you want. And when you meet someone, you know, like, it's totally disarming. You can just be relaxed because he's such a nice guy.
You've worked with a bunch of musicians, a bunch of producers, and I mean, without naming names, or unless you want to name names, what makes for I was talking to Matt about this, and I've talked to other musicians, what makes for a really good album recording experience and what makes for a bad one? Let's assume the music is good, and but you've got, and the player and the musicians are good, but just the environment of the studio or the producer or the engineer, or what can be off?
I think if you have preparation, anything else can be dealt with. Preparation is the biggest element in me going into a studio, being prepared, knowing the material, and having a rapport with the other players where you've solidified a dynamic with the songs and the material, and you know it's going to work. You could be in a broom closet or a spacious studio or whatever. That's the biggest thing. And it's also the thing that's lacking a lot in what I see in a lot of kind of modern recording situations where I think people go in and think, well, we'll figure it out in the studio, and there's going to be lots of time and anything can be fixed. I think in the past there was a lot of emphasis on you had to learn it and get it completely right so that when you walked in the room, you just played it and that's it. It's done. There's not a lot of overdubbing and fixing. But I think there's so much emphasis now on fixing things or cutting and pasting things after the fact. Or if you don't know what kind of guitar solo you're going to play, you just do 50 and you comp the best parts into one. It's like, to me, that's so time consuming and really monotonously overwhelming.
Yeah.
Just the idea of like, I don't know when this will end. Like for me, like I want to know.
What song are we playing?
Yeah. I want to know the material so well that when I go in, it's really just about playing it 3 or 4 times and picking the best one.
It does I'm sure there's a bunch of advantages to digital being edited on a computer and all that and not always being bound to tape, but does it also create that, well, we'll just do it again. Well, it'll be real easy to just overdub it again or try it again.
Or just fix it. There's just so many ways to fix things now that don't even require you to do it again. Yeah. Or like, well, we'll just take the back half of that one and the first half of this one and put them together and we'll build a bridge in the middle. And like actually all those tools are fantastic, but the tools are better when you have specific reasons to use them rather than just utilizing the tools the entire time because you don't really know what you want.
Again, we're here talking to Greg Cartwright of Raining Sound of the Hypos, the album that just came out. And the Pull Chains are playing at Goner Fest, and we'll be recording an album, Goner Fest, next week here in Memphis. And you said you're on the Thursday.
Yes, we're the first band on Thursday.
The analogy to print, I've been in publishing so long, I can remember we did paste up and, which was crazy, and there was wax involved. It's like incredibly hard to do and expensive to do, and then even desktop publishing, but there was printing.
Right.
And once you sent it to the printer, I remember really screwing something up one time when I was younger, and we had to call the printer in New Jersey and stop, and we had to get new giant iOmega discs that we had to ship by like $200.
That must have felt like a heavy mistake.
It was a heavy mistake, and it was all my fault.
Yeah.
But you really had this weight that once you went in print, you could not retract it. And I think there is a thing with digital publishing, although there's all these wonderful advantages. We can be more timely. We can add to stories. We can correct stories in real time. It can create some sort of like a safety net that you rely on too much if you're not careful.
That is the thing. Like I'm all for the technology because there's so many wonderful things that have come along with the digital aspect. One being that when you mix something, you can come back to the mix 2 weeks later and decide you just want to change the vocal. In the old days on tape, you had to basically dedicate yourself to a mix. If you really liked it, but you decided the tambourine was too loud, well, you had to come back and try to get the mix exactly the same.
Yeah.
You had to reset the whole mix by ear, and that's really, really hard. So you're not going to be able to replicate it perfectly to what you had before that you loved so much except for that tambourine.
Yeah.
And so all those kind of elements, like the ability to use the technology sparingly, really to just fix what's necessary rather than to over rely on it. And I don't even there are people out there who the technology is the medium.
Sure.
It is their art, people's art to manipulate the technology to that degree. But I think part of my mindset is because of how old I am and because of the workflow that I grew up in. To me, that makes a lot of sense. Whereas everything that I said about what makes a great record, as far as someone younger who comes in and plans to be super creative in the studio and just vibe on what's going on and use the technology to change things all over the place, that's a whole other experience and a whole other mindset, which so to them maybe being, having just a more vague idea when they walk in the studio might be the way to go. Yeah. So, but I think for a 2 guitars, bass, drums, rock band, being super familiar with the material is really the way. And then as far as producers go, I think having a producer, a lot of people think that a producer is going to shape and mold them into some particular sound. And there's definitely people out there who have that ability and will do that and can do that. But I think really what's best is a producer who has all of those skills, but is listening to what's happening already, who listens and knows what you sound like, and then can help you better achieve the effect you want.
Yeah. Matt talked about that a bunch. People can go back in the feed of Sidebar and talking about how he works with people and that kind of, that space that I feel like you're describing of, he's there to do a thing, but also not there to be a dictator, take over. And he articulated it better, as did you. We talk about how things have changed with recording. Is the live show still kind of sort of a live show? Like you said, a couple guitars, a drummer, it's still pretty unchanged from where 20 years ago, 30 years ago?
For me, it's pretty unchanged because really, the recording process was just a way to promote the live music in the beginning. So sheet music was one way to get your word out there of these wonderful songs you've written. And after that, there was there was a recording, which was mostly just live. So it's just a representation of your music that you could then send out there, and it would be a promotional item. And, eventually it overtook that purpose.
Yeah.
But so to me, like the two are kind of the same. So for the most part, we're replicating the same thing, whether it's in a studio or in front of a group of people.
Yeah.
And there are going to be some tweaks, and you can embellish things and improvise in ways that that people enjoy.
Again, we're here with Greg Cartwright of the hypos of Pull Chain. Is it Pull Chains? It's
Pull Chains, plural.
Pull Chains, plural. Playing at Gonerfest next week. Also, a lot of folks know him from Raining Sound. Let me take a minute here. I'm Eric Barnes, the Daily Memphian, and this is the Sidebar. It airs on WYXR 91.7 every Thursday at 11:30. Focused on the community, arts, culture, and everything in between. It's not just a radio show, though. It's one of many weekly podcasts we do at the Daily Memphian, including Bill Dree's Politics podcast, On the Record, the Memphis Grizzlies podcast with Drew Hill and Chris Harrington, and the Tigers podcast is back with John Martin and our Frank Bonner and Parth are all on there, and depending on what's going on in in Tigers world. And there's also our food podcast, Sound Bites, hosted by Jennifer Chandler, and it airs on WYXR every Thursday at 11, right before the Sidebar. We also produce the podcast version of Behind the Headlines, the TV show we do with the folks at WKNO every week. All of our podcasts are on the Daily Memphian site, as well as iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can get this show and Sound Bites, which is hosted by, did Holly Whitfield? Yeah, Holly Whitfield did the show this week and next, or a couple. The one that airs next week. So Holly Whitfield's back while Jennifer's taking a break. You can get that also at WYXR.org. You can download the WYXR app. And that includes all the WYXR shows, the talk shows, the music shows, archives of all of them. So it's a great way to keep up with what's going on at WYXR. Also, support WYXR. It's nonprofit, listener-supported radio. Become a member. You get all kinds of benefits. You get, I think you get tickets to shows, you get T-shirts, you get swag. But you can also just do a one-off donation if you can. That is very important to WYXR. And I'll also mention, if you're not already a paid subscriber to the Daily Memphian, do consider becoming one. We are a nonprofit newsroom, the largest newsroom in the region, and paid subscriptions are a big part of what keeps us going. Oh, and it's our 6th anniversary of the Daily Memphian today.
Yay!
Yes! That's pretty good. 6 years.
That's
pretty good. So 6 years ago, today I was exhausted and had no idea what I was doing. But now I'm totally on it. Let's see, I mentioned Behind the Headlines. We have coming up soon Bakara Malden, the interim CEO of MATA, and everything going on there. But we look forward to talking to her about that and the plan, hopefully, to turn things around with MATA. We've got at least JB Smiley from City Council, maybe someone else, I'm not sure, coming up soon, as well as Mayor Paul Young a few weeks from now to come on and talk about basically 1 year since he won election. Recently, we had Marie Fagans, the relatively new superintendent for Memphis Shelby County Schools. That was a great conversation for all kinds of things they've got going on. And then a couple weeks ago, we had Doug McGowan from MLGW and the chief science director, I think is his title, from Protect Our Aquifer, talking about the XAI plant, MLGW, all things power, and so on. Coming recently on this show, the Sidebar, we had Josh Campbell from Spill It talking about the cool work they do of storytelling. We also had Craig Brewer on talking about not just Fight Night, the new show. He's a big part of executive producer and directed some episodes, but just his career and all kinds of work he's done. It was great to talk to Craig. And one last bit of housekeeping. If you missed it, our small business seminar was recently, we held a couple weeks ago. You can get the video of that at Daily Memphian or go to our YouTube page. We had Beverly Robertson and her son Ryan Robertson. They were super funny. Scott Tashy from City Silo and Monique Williams from Biscuits and Jams. They were all great, great speakers. It was a really good conversation. And coming up October 24th is our Developing Memphis seminar at the Botanic Garden. We'll have Chase Carlisle, the developer brother, not the city council brother, as well as Ernest Strickland is 95% certain he's going to be there. Ernest has been in business in Memphis for many, many years and right now runs the Black Chamber of Commerce. So he'll be there talking about developments and developing and so on and so forth. That's coming up October 24th. Go to Eventbrite, search for Daily Memphian and get tickets. But we are still here with Greg Cartwright. How'd you get into this music thing? That's a dumb question, but it's actually, I really am so curious because, as I always say or I say too often, I love music. I listen to tons of music. I cannot play a note of music. So I'm always just kind of shocked and in awe of people who can play music professionally or play music well. How did you start?
I guess it's poetry. I started off with poetry. But music was always a big deal in my house. My stepfather was a record collector and a big music head, and he was always playing music. And I loved the music, but I also saw the music as a strategy to get to know him better. Huh. Probably unconsciously, but in retrospect, I realized that was something that we could bond over. Sure. A shared love of this music. And I just really became consumed by it, really. It seemed to be the only thing I wanted to do. I was terrible in school. My grades were horrible, I will admit. And I think at one point I was probably 15 and I just received straight Fs. And I had good history and art grades, but everything else was pretty horrible. And my dad took me out to eat, and he said, my stepdad, I should say, he said, clearly you're not doing well in school. Just if you will tell me what it is you want to do, technical school, do you want to be a mechanic? Is there some other field you want to go into? I will support you. Just tell me what you want to do. I said, I want to be a musician. He said, pick something else. And I get it, because even though he loved it, even though it was his passion as well, he knew he had friends who were musicians and he saw how they lived and he knew it was hard. Yeah. But
that's a very, for lack of a better word, gracious, a very good thing to say. I mean, versus putting on a restriction for 3 weeks and taking away your stuff. And maybe they did that too, but to just say, hey, maybe school's not for
what's going on with you? Yeah.
I mean,
I want to see you succeed. How can I help you succeed? No, I mean, it was actually, in retrospect, it was pretty thoughtful.
Yeah. You talk about some of the work. I don't know where else. Let me ask you this. The work you've done in the various bands, what gets asked about least? In a way that you're like, people don't ask about that.
That's a good question. What gets asked about least? The Deadly Snakes. It was a band from Canada that I worked with. They were from Toronto, and I was their producer and eventually kind of became an auxiliary member of the band and toured with them and stuff. And that band, because I think it's just mostly because it's unknown to a lot of people in the States. They did have a cult following, but there's a lot of people that don't really know about them. Andre Etier, the lead singer, he has actually had some success in Canada now with his music, but the Deadly Snakes thing never got beyond just like a cult pop.
Yeah. When you say success, I mean, as your stepfather foreshadowed, it's a very difficult business, but you've made a career of it. I mean, so success is...
I've been very lucky, and I've also had a very supportive family. My wife, super supportive. I look back and I'm amazed that I don't live in a pitch in a field somewhere or something. I'm definitely, there's not a lot of money in this business.
Right.
So you have to really love the art, or it has to really be some kind of therapy for you or something. And I mean, and for me, it's all those things. It's definitely therapy, and it's satisfying. And now I've reached a point in my life where it's financially rewarding as well. And that was the component that took the longest to achieve, because I actively rejected it.
Really?
Oh yeah. For a lot of times we were touring, opening for the Hives in the early 2000s. And they let me know that there were people at 3 different majors that wanted to sign us. And I didn't go to the meetings. that I was supposed to have with these people because I didn't want to sign to a major label. I was afraid of signing. I was afraid that it would become something beyond my control. Yeah. And I was afraid that it would become performative and no longer be the thing that was inside of me. It would become this thing where I would just have to recreate something for people. I just was worried that it would change. The art would change.
And that was with which band?
That was with Raining Sound.
Yeah. Do you regret that?
Not at all.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't ready for any kind of success at all. And that was why I didn't know at the time why I was doing it. But it was when my wife found out, she was very upset with me because it looked like self-sabotage. In fact, it was self-sabotage. But it was really I was trying to protect myself because, I've seen a lot of people get success or find success too quickly and not know what to do with themselves and the excesses that come with it, the attention, the ego that it requires. I just didn't have that.
And about how old were you then?
I was in my mid-20s.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I had already had Oblivions and Compulsive Gamblers and all that stuff. I had already done all this stuff that was really just about living in Memphis where no one is making it. No one is like getting to the next level in music. So it's just about entertaining your friends and delving into whatever truths you have to explore, whatever kind of stuff is going on inside you. So it's not about success at all. You're not chasing anything. There's no local band that's like, oh my God, REM is making it. Let's try to be more like them. There's nothing to replicate because there's no success.
Right.
So, and that's not, I'm not saying that like it's not a good thing that Memphis has been left behind in the music industry because I feel like in many ways it doesn't get the attention that it deserves because there's so much creativity and good music here. But the fact that it is like in this vacuum allows you to explore everything without having to pander to any kind of to get the critical success or whatever. Like there's just you doing your thing.
I had a friend who's a musician. We kind of lost touch now, but he was a very talented musician, and it had a bit of a run, playing, and was in a band called Moses Guest, and they did the Southwest College circuit for a bit and opened for some people, and he talked about how early on he needed to be, as a guitar player. He was in Austin. I should say that he was in Texas. He needed to be the next Stevie Ray Vaughan, which is kind of ridiculous to even suggest, right? I mean, he's a very talented guy, but Stevie Ray Vaughan was sort of iconic and unique, and as are many musicians. And then when they were in Moses Guest, it was like sort of be the next Dave Matthews Band, which I think, I'm paraphrasing him, but it was kind of like, at once we sort of were working so hard and playing so much and living out of the back of a car. We were like, yeah, sure, we'll take the money to do that. But I don't think he wanted to be the next Dave Matthews. It was just sort of like this carrot.
I think that's something that we all,
that
happens when you're looking to validate what you're making this art. The way to validate it is to make it financially rewarding.
Yeah.
And so how do you do that? Well, then I guess I need to look at what's successful and try to replicate it to some degree. And so I think that happens to all of us. It's like this weird treadmill that everyone has to get on. And that is exactly what I was afraid of.
Yeah.
I didn't want to get on that treadmill because I didn't know where it went.
Yeah.
And wherever it was, I was pretty sure I didn't want to go there.
Yeah.
So like, to me, what seemed safe was to just continue to be making music for a very limited audience who really seemed to understand what it was I was doing.
Yeah. We were talking before, you were talking with Natalie Van Gundy, producer of the show, about your house.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know, I had to run out for a second, so I don't know what you were talking about. So I'm asking about the house with literally no idea where we're going with this.
So 20 years ago, my wife and I moved to North Carolina for a job opportunity for her. And that worked out great, made a lot of friends there and stuff. And about 4 years ago, we started looking for a house in Memphis because we wanted to be back here some. If not all the time, at least part of the time. And so we started looking in Midtown when we lived here before. We lived on Walker Street over in Cooper Young, and where Goner Records is now, that was my record store.
Oh, you're right. Yeah.
And so
what was it before it was Goner? This is great Memphis trivia.
It was called Legba Records.
Okay.
And so when we started looking again, we looked at Midtown. We couldn't afford anything over here. So, because we just wanted something cheap that would be a home base for when we were going to be here. We wouldn't be here all the time. And we looked and couldn't find anything. So we started looking a little further east, and we lucked into a house that had just come up for sale. It was a mid-century modern place, like right over by Dixon Art Gallery. And it turned out that the house had belonged to Marshall Grant, the stand-up bass player from the Johnny Cash and the Tennessee Two.
Oh, wow.
So it was Luther and Marshall were both mechanics together. And I think their boss, his sister and her husband had just moved to town, and that was Johnny Cash. And so he said, my two mechanics have a picking party every Saturday at Marshall's house. If you want to, you should go. You know, the girls play rook in the kitchen, and the guys all sit in this little wood den and play guitars. And that little picking party eventually became the band. At first, they were just a trio all playing guitars, acoustic guitars. And then they were like, this is not really a band. We need other instruments. So Luther bought an electric guitar and Marshall bought a bass. And they continued to practice in the den. And I think they wrote like the first 3 Sun singles there and continued to practice there up until there was money and they could afford to do some other kind of practice space. But they held on to the house until Marshall died. And then about 10 years ago, or Marshall died 10 years ago, about 2 years ago, 3 years ago now, I guess, Etta, his wife, died. And that's when the house went up for sale. Their son, Randy, sold us the house.
Yeah.
So they never sold it. They never updated it either.
Yeah.
So it's still total mid-century modern inside.
That's incredible.
Yep.
So many of those houses were blown out with a big bonus room.
Most everything, has been bumped out. And,
yeah.
And like kind of like, it's funny. It's very hard to find people to make mid-century drapes and stuff now. Like if you want like bark cloth drapes and you're telling people, it's like, I've had so many people say no one wants that. Like everyone's doing Southern modern now. You should just revamp your whole house. Like, no, I just want this very simple thing, but it's kind of difficult.
As we wrap up, last question, which will be obviously interesting with you. I always ask people what their first concert was, but for you that might be a little blurry of just given the amount of music was in your life.
A lot of things that I went to with my parents. Like I remember seeing the Beach Boys at some point. That was a pretty early thing. The first thing that I ever spent my own money on was Alice Cooper.
Oh.
Yeah.
Mid-South Coliseum?
That was at the Auditorium North Hall.
Wow.
Yeah.
So was it just peak makeup, crazy? Like
it was like, this was mid 80s he was wearing the makeup and everything, but it was not as good as it had gotten a little. The original band wasn't there.
Yeah, I got
it. It was a little corny, but it was still great.
Yeah, it's still great.
And my mom was like, well, when we went to see him, he did 3 costume changes.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, it wasn't that good.
It's weird to think back on Alice Cooper, and I kind of remember even as a kid when Alice Cooper, one, it was super scary and weird and cool and all this, and then he'd show up on things like the Donnie Marie show.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you just go, wow, this is an act. Yeah. Okay. It was sort of, and it was a realization with Kiss as well. You know, like, oh, this is just a big act. I mean, as again, we're probably about the same age. Anyway, Alice Cooper, that's a good one though. Greg Cartwright, again, playing with the Pull Chains at Gonerfest next weekend. People can get the full schedule. Just go look up Gonerfest. Thanks so much for being here. We really appreciate it. But that is all the time we have this week. Do join us again. Next week, we'll have a couple of repeat episodes. Thanks very much.